Kirby's Dream Land was developed by HAL Laboratories and released on the original Game Boy in 1992. This game actually marks the debut of the Kirby character, who has since been featured in dozens of games. On the surface, Kirby's Dream Land appears to be a fairly straightforward platformer. However, there is some depth here, and the game feels a lot different than the dozens of 90s platformers I've played recently. Kirby can jump as expected, but you can't jump on enemies, you have to inhale them. Once you have, you can swallow them or spit them out as a projectile. In later games, swallowing an enemy would give you their abilities, but that is absent in this first game. In addition to inhaling enemies, pressing up will suck in air, and then Kirby floats in his bloated state. At first, this felt very strange, having both a simple jump and the ability to float. It just didn't feel natural during my first playthrough. However, during subsequent runs, it did start to feel rather intuitive. As a whole, the controls are tight and responsive, with just the right momentum in the jumping and running. In most platformers, having the ability to float would break the game, as you would simply float over obstacles on your way to the finish. However, the levels in Kirby's Dream Land are expertly crafted and do a great job matching Kirby's moveset. You will never have the opportunity to simply float by large chunks of the level. The levels also have a decent amount of variety. There are 4 total, and they feel vastly different from each other. From the wispy woods to the bubbly clouds and then back down to the water, complete with pirate ships. Kirby certainly covers a lot of ground. Kirby's Dream Land is one of those quality Game Boy games that feels like there is more than 4 colors on the screen at a time. The developers did a great job mixing up the backgrounds and including a lot of detail on the foreground sprites, and overall, the title feels less like a stripped-down console title and more like a full-fledged release. Playing this on a Super Game Boy adds to the illusion with a custom color palette that fits the world perfectly. Even better than the graphics is the soundtrack. Like the NES, the Game Boy's sound hardware is iconic, and Kirby's Dream Land has a terrific 8-bit sound. The compositions are truly memorable, and should have no problems getting stuck in your head for days. The only problems with Kirby's Dream Land is the length and the difficulty. The game is short, requiring just 30 minutes of your time. The first 4 levels are fairly straightforward platforming affairs, with a mid-boss and ending with a main boss. The 5th and final stage in the game includes a boss rush, where you must defeat the 4 main bosses again before the final showdown with King Dedede. However, nothing in Kirby's Dream Land is difficult. The game is actually very easy. I didn't find it too offensive, as I believe the game's designers intended the game to be accessible to all ages. But others might be put off by this direction. Thankfully, after the end credits roll, there is a cheat code for an extra mode. This is actually the same game with new enemies and alternate enemy fire patterns. This mode is significantly more challenging, especially the bosses. Overall, I rather like Kirby's Dream Land. It is a refreshing take on the side-scrolling platformer, with a nice mix of standard concepts and new moves that make the game a worthwhile playthrough. The controls are responsive, the graphics are technically great and still appealing, and the music really puts the presentation over the top. Most importantly, I had a lot of fun playing through Kirby's Dream Land. Later games do improve on the formula and length, but it's always fun to go back and experience how it all started. 3 out of 5.